Well, welcome everybody to this Safety Institute of Australia webinar. My name is Stephen Thomas and I'm the chair of the SIA's Technical Advisory Committee. This webinar is regarding the proposed new International Standards Organisation 45001 standard for occupational health and safety. And the standard in question has been designed to provide a framework for the management of prevention of injuries in the work environment. And the intended outcome of this standard is to improve and provide safe and healthy workplaces for workers around the world. So it's an international standard. The draft international standard ISO 45001 2016 was actually published on the 12th of February this year, and there was an international ballot. Unfortunately, the ballot wasn't successful, so the current status of this standard is now to go to a second draft, and so we now have an opportunity as members of the Safety Institute to provide input into the further development of this really critical standard for our profession across Australia. So again, welcome to this webinar. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you find it informative and useful in your practice as health and safety professionals. I'll now hand over to Roland Tan, who will conduct the rest of the presentation. Thank you for joining.
Very warm welcome to all of you. This presentation will be broken into two sections. I would first like to introduce to you the ISO 45001 OH&S management system standard and its relationship, with the global framework for management system standards, which is the Annex SL. And afterwards, I'll be sharing with you the Safety Institute of Australia recommendations for the to improve the standard. So let's go to the first slide. The objectives, the three objectives. So the first objective of this webinar is to introduce the upcoming global OH&S management system standard and its relationship with the global framework of management system standards, which is the Annex SL. Secondly, to summarize the SIA's recommendations to improve the ISO 45001 standard, which was introduced earlier this year. And thirdly, to provide the opportunity to members to feedback in the hope of improving, the standard. This is the agenda that we'll be adhering to. So I'll introduce the 45001 standard, the framework and its relationship with the DIS, the Annex SL, and then we'll be looking at the SIA recommendations in regards to the standard, the 45001 standard. So for those of you who have a copy of the standard, that section A, terms and definitions, would refer to clause number 3 in that document. And clause number 4 to 10 would refer to the standard requirements. Before I continue with this next slide, Shauna, could you please, just as a quick introduction, of the previous documents that were distributed to members, if you could just share that, with everyone. Okay, so I believe all of you had received a copy of this newsletter, which explained a little bit about the ISO 45001. Shauna, could you scroll and let them have a look at this? Quickly have a look at this document. Okay, these are the attached hyperlinks, that were earlier provided with the newsletter. Shauna, could you close this and move on? Thank you, Shauna. All right, so we'll talk about the SIA recommendations as reflected in the survey later. But let's have a look. Let's look at the framework for the ISO 45001. Now, this model represents the ISO 45001. You've got the clause requirements of planning, doing, checking, and actions. And they're associated with the clause references in the standard, which I believe you have a copy of. All right? So take, for example, planning. Planning, and you see reference clause number 6, and that refers to the clause number in the ISO 45001 standard. So this clause requirement in planning refers to the occupational health and safety risks that need to be identified and mitigated. And the driver for that identification and mitigation is derived from understanding the organizational context. The organizational context requires the internal and external issues and the needs and expectations of interested parties to be identified. So that is a driver in helping identify the planning of the occupational health and safety management system. Planning requires not only the identification of the OH&S risks, but also their plan controls. Now with that, following planning, you have the support and operational requirements that are needed. Following which, performance evaluation, as shown in clause 9 of the standard, needs to be applied. And finally, we've got actions that are described in clause 10 of the standard. Centrally, you'll notice that leadership is required throughout all phases of the health and safety management system. This leadership refers to the plans and actions of the senior leadership team in driving and ensuring the success of the health and safety management system. So this is where the policy, the OH&S policy of the organization, the roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities are identified, and where the health and safety objectives and their planned programs are implemented. Now, this next series of slides would help you understand the relationship between the clause requirements of the 45001 against the Annex SL. Now, the Annex SL is an ISO directive that was initiated some years ago, and as a result, you have all the other standards such as the ones for quality, environmental, and so on, that have to be aligned with this new framework. So as you can see, Shauna, where am I able to get the highlighter? Could you Could I get the highlighter on so I could yeah. All right, thank you. Yeah. All right. So you see that relationship. The core text of the Annex SL is reflected also in the 45001, as you can see. Context, understanding of the organization and its context, understanding of the needs and expectations of workers and interested parties, determining the scope of the OH&S management system, with leadership and worker participation, leadership and commitment, policy, instead of just policy, a generic policy, it's an OH policy, for the 45001, organizational roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, authorities, participation and consultation, actions to address risks and opportunities, OH&S objectives and planning to achieve them. And then you have the operational part, where it reflects, the support, resources, competence, awareness, information and communications, and also documented information, and also operational planning and control, which also includes management of change, outsourcing, procurement, contractors, and emergency preparedness and response. And in the performance side of things, you've got monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. It includes internal audits and management review. And finally, you've got clause 10, which talks about improvements, incident, non-conformity, and corrective action, continual improvements. Okay, let's step back again. Now, I think at this point in time, I'll like to pause and see if there's any questions that you have that I could respond to.
Hi, Roland. There are currently no questions coming in through our participants. Please continue your presentation. Thank you.
All right. I'm getting some feedback here. They're saying that the slides are running faster than I'm speaking. Now, okay, question here about the draft standard being not being available. Yes, that's correct, because Standards Australia controls this ISO 45001 standard, and if you have not signed up, to receive a copy, you won't be able to review it. So sorry about that. Can you post a link to the draft standard? Unfortunately not, because only those who have signed the Standards Australia deed would be able to have a copy. How can we make comment on this if we can't get the document to review? Well, yeah, that's unfortunate. I have tried, to include as much information as I could in the newsletter and also in the e-survey that was sent out to members. So I would like to encourage you to have a look at those documents again, and perhaps you could post your questions, and I could respond to them. Okay, I'm getting quite a lot of questions coming in now, so I'll just take them one at a time. All right. Thank you, John. You asked a question. Sorry, I'll start with Kylie first. You signed a deed and you haven't received a copy of the standard. I apologize for that, Kylie. We'll have to check with Standards Australia again. John, you asked what is meant by continual improvement objectives. Well, continual improvement objectives refer to the objectives, that the organization had identified earlier. And it, so the requirement there, is to improve on those objectives. Brandon, how about ISO 45001 versus 45001? Okay, good question, Brandon. Look, my understanding is that 4801 still remains the current standard in Australia and New Zealand, and with when the 45001 standard has been ratified, only then would the 4801 standard be replaced by the new standard, right? So that's maybe in the next 3 years. I'm getting a lot of questions here, so please be patient with me. I'll try and answer them one at a time. Okay. Neil, yes, the slides will be available after the webinar. And I understand that Stephen will be meeting with Standards Australia to try and facilitate the access, of relevant standards.
Hi, Roland. We've gotten a question from Bruce, and he stated, my understanding is that ISO applied the 1-year extension to the deadline, and if resolution cannot be found on the outstanding issues, this will become a guideline of sorts and not published as a standard. Is this correct?
Yeah, and it's for that reason that the PC 283 committee is trying to come to a conclusion, and have the updated draft available, hopefully by the end of this year, if not, early next year. My understanding is that there's going to be another meeting that's going to be convened in Europe, I think next month. So yeah, I think we'll hear very shortly, from the PC 283 committee. Okay, next question, John. You asked, as a subcontracting company, we have many stakeholders. Is it an expectation to consider all of these? And yes, subcontractors are part of the procurement requirement in the ISO 45001 standard. So yes, they have stakeholder control. Sorry, subcontractor control has to be ensured.
Roland, another question has come through from Christopher. Why was the ISO 54001 ballot unsuccessful? What are the points of contention?
Well, I think there were several, and one of them, being industrial relations related. There's this sentiment that some of the I'll give you an example. Okay, there is a belief that the standard needs to reflect the rights of workers, that they should be able, not to work in in a dangerous situation or a dangerous workplace. So yeah, so that's an example of some of the disagreement. Effie, you said that we perform work on behalf of government, New South Wales, which has WHS accreditation requirements in place which exceed 4801. How does ISO compare to government requirements? Well, really, there is no comparison here, because if you take a look at either the 4801 or the 45001, there is a requirement to adhere to regulatory requirements. So statutory and other requirements are necessary. And this is one of the recommendations, that the SIA had put forth to the committee to ensure, that examples, be provided to help facilitate the understanding and implementation of the management system. Okay. Penny, you asked a question, all draft standards, are they distributed directly from Standards Australia? And yes, the answer is correct. You can purchase, from Standards Australia or any other standards authority across the world, for a copy of the 45001. But as I said earlier, this is at its draft stage, so we'll just have to wait, until next year, when the standard, has been published. Michael, you asked a question. How does? Sorry,
yes,
Michael.
I was just about to relay that. Michael's question was, how will this relate to WHS Act 2011?
Yes. Again, the requirement of the 45001 is that the organization adhere, to the various acts and regulations, including code of practices, and other guidelines, as and when, they are required. Okay, Melanie, thank you. You provided a link there to healthandsafety.com.au in regards to Brandon's earlier query. Michelle, you have a question about, keen to know Effie's question. What will be the case for any requirements Australia has in place that exceeds the ISO potential standard? Well, this 45001 standard, is a voluntary standard. It is not legislated. Now, some organizations or some maybe government departments may have requirements of their contractors or suppliers, to be ISO certified. So if that be the case, then all the clause requirements, there is no exemption. All the clause requirements of the ISO 45001 standard would have to be adhered to.
Roland, we have another question from Sean. How will this relate
Sean?
to the NAT for self-insurers?
I believe there are similarities with the NAT. But like I said, I would believe if you're accredited, with NAT, then you've just got to comply, with it. And I would imagine that there's a lot of similarities between the two systems.
John has asked another question. STD is a framework act. Is the requirements of the state in protecting workers?
Sorry, what is the STD? Oh, okay, sorry, that wasn't a question. Oh, standard, all right. Oh, thank you for that, Andrew. All right, can we, I'd like to move on, so can we just hold on to some more questions, and let's move on to the SIA recommendations. I just like to say that it was a team effort, in the 108 recommendations made, to the SF001 committee. Stephen, Leo Rushina, and PJ Fleming were also involved in the process of identifying those recommendations. So let's have a look at the recommendations now. We'll start first with the terms and definitions. Terms and definitions are important because they would help, in the understanding and the implementation of the requirements. So let's start first, with promotion and collaboration. This is something, that had not been included in the draft standard. So we're recommending that this be included. See, promotion and collaboration, they reflect the necessity to instigate, reinvigorate, cooperate, coordinate, and sustain a strong OH&S culture. The term workers need to include volunteers, interns, and students. And we need to provide more examples of interested parties to facilitate their identification. The workplace, there should be critical examples needed to facilitate the identification of the workplace. And again, like I said, for more details, please refer to the e-survey that was distributed earlier. Hazard. Well, we're saying that the source or situation should also be there should also be a condition or circumstances, included in the definition of hazards, because they're not just source or situation. There should be examples provided, for hazards, including physical, chemical, including nanoparticles, biological, microbiological, psychosocial, to facilitate the identification and control. More examples should be provided for risks other than OH risks to facilitate the identification control. Competency is, aside from knowledge or training or skills, competency needs to identify the inherent ability, the physical and psychosocial aspects in order to perform safe work. Annotation is also needed to facilitate the identification of regulatory and industry best practice in assuring competence. Participation and consultation. So moving on now to the requirements of the standard. Promotion and collaboration should be included to emphasize the proactive and cooperative approach needed in building and sustaining a good OH culture by management. There were several errors in the referencing within the draft standard, so we made recommendations, that they should be corrected. Legal and other requirements. Annotation should provide more practical examples of other requirements. Okay? I think some of you were asking earlier, what are the other requirements? Well, they include, they could include national and international standards, codes of practices, body of knowledge, chain of custody, guidelines, protocols, manufacturers' recommendations, and so forth. Competence is about aptitude and skills. The annotation should explain that competence may require demonstration of credentials, right, through licensing, permits, registration, certification, required by the jurisdictional authority where the work is being completed. Now, the clause requirement for operational control should, the term eliminating and controlling hazards should be included in line 879 to ensure the reduction of OH risks. This would emphasize and prioritize the importance in identifying and controlling risks as reasonably practicable. The term dangerous conditions environment plan need to be included in line 882 to facilitate the identification of appropriate risk controls. Consistent with the referencing throughout the document, the missing clause references should be made available to facilitate understanding and implementation. And technology, there should be more examples provided for technology to facilitate the procurement control process in relation to OH performance in line 918. Emergency preparedness and response. First aid is not the only planned response to commonly encountered emergencies. More common examples need to be provided. Example, raising alert, de-energization, shutdown, purging, suppression, containment, and so forth. Authorizations, aside from responsibilities, need to be included to emphasize the need of identifying, communicating, ensuring competencies and leadership. Performance evaluation, I think this will be the last one. The term responsibilities is needed to identify appropriate competency in controlling the methods for monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation to ensure valid results. And calibration needs to be conducted in reference to national or international standards where available. And lastly, in the absence of known national or international standards, the calibration process needs to be substantiated and controlled through peer review, technical references, process criteria, competent persons, appropriate equipments and work environment, and maintenance of records. All right, please provide me with your queries, and I'll try and answer all of them if I can. So let's have the first question.
Hi, Roland. The first question is from Anne. Does the ISO 45001 bring us more in line with the ILO OH&S provisions, the current draft, that is?
The ISO 45001 standard is an improvement, I must say, quite a big improvement, to the 4801. If you have a copy, I think you'll appreciate, the extent, of the differentiation with the 4801. Okay, next question.
Great. The next question is from John. How do you put circumstances in a risk register?
Well, circumstances are related to the issues that you identify, along, with the needs and expectations of the interested parties. Now, by the way, there has been an introduction or substitution of some of the previous terms used in some of the other management system standards. So, this term, interested parties, is synonymous, with the stakeholders term that was previously used. I hope, I answered the question, John.
We have a comment from David, and his comment is circumstances should be enshrined within the context of the risk register. The next question is from Andrew. How can SIA propose references to OH&S culture when industry has such trouble defining what this is?
Yeah, that's a, a very good question. What is a good OH&S culture? Well, I would like to think of it, as zero harm. Yeah, I think that would that's the end result, but obviously it requires a lot of effort and planning, teamwork, empowerment, to arrive, at zero harm. So and that's why if you recall, the earlier slide I showed you, leadership, is central in the phases of the management system implementation and improvement. All right. So leadership drives the cultural change that is hoped for.
Right, just going back to John's question regarding circumstances in a risk register, can you please give us an example of a circumstance?
Well, circumstance, would refer to the conditions, that you face. So we have a rainy situation, a slippery condition, excessive heat. All these, would be considered, should be considered, as impacting, the health and safety of the workers.
Great, and the next question comes from Gunther. What is the likelihood of the ISO standard if it should ever be ratified, or its overriding requirements being adopted by the National Unified OH&S system, given that some states still have not signed up to the existing system?
I think we have to separate this voluntary management system standard from the regulatory requirements. As I explained earlier, some government departments would require the suppliers to be certified to either the 4801 or the upcoming 45001. So depending on the jurisdiction or the contractual requirement, it's a voluntary. Please remember that this management system standard is a voluntary standard, unless it's been identified by the jurisdictional authority that it is a requirement.
John has just made a comment. Yes, legislation is the context. Does not have to be uniform across all states, but could be international. The next question is from Nicholas. If you hold AS4801, will you be able to transition to 45001?
Most certainly, Nicholas, because if you have a robust 4801, I wouldn't think that it will be too difficult to transition to the 45001.
That brings us to the end of the questions, Roland. If any questions were missed or would you like to submit more, please type into the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner. Another question has come through from Deepak. How this new standard will help to stop good employees making shortcut at certain point of time during their job. Good employees who are leading the safety culture by example.
Well, again, if the organizational leadership requires that the management system standard, has to be adhered, that would most certainly support these good employees in their quest, to ensure high safety standards, are being maintained. Okay, I hope I answered that question, Deepak.
Another question has come through from Andrea, or I guess it's a statement, 45001, more aligned to OH&S AS 18001, more active leadership focus.
Yes, Andrea, I share the same sentiments. Yeah, there certainly is more leadership required. So yeah, they're very similar.
The question has come through from Melanie. Do we have a realistic time frame for possible acceptance and implementation of 45001, or am I dreaming?
All right, Melanie, I think at this point in time, it would have to be at least mid or end of 2017 before the final release of the standard. And I would assume, based on my experience with ISO 9001 and 14001, there will be a 3-year grace period for organizations, to upgrade to the 45001 standard.
Great. So just as per earlier to David's comment, I think it is more aligned to 9001. Now the next question is from Quasi. This still focuses on the leadership. How much focus is on the role of employees' initiative to implement it?
Well, it's really important for the leadership to identify the responsibilities and authorities for planning and implementing the OH&S management system. So everyone has a role to play. Teamwork, is definitely a requirement to succeed in having a successful health and safety management system.
Thank you, Roland. There's a comment that's come through from Andrew. There are some great, brilliant questions here, and Roland is answering them as best as he can. To the SIA, it would be great for a platform for these discussions to continue post-conference. A question from Tony. If 45001 is not adopted in Australia, will 4801 be reviewed or new standard developed?
Okay. Australia is bound by its agreement, international agreement. So yes, if 45001 becomes the standard, for health and safety, then Australia, as a signatory, will have to subscribe. Will have to accept the and adopt, the 45001 standard. Tony, the other thing too I wanted to mention was that even though Australia has to adopt the 45001 standard, there is also provisional that it could supplementary documents, could accompany, the standard to reflect its Australian requirements.
So we'll be taking the final question for the session, and this is from Tarina. Will WHS advisors be required to be registered or licensed?
Sorry, I didn't get that. Can you please repeat that again?
Will WHS advisors be required to be registered or licensed?
No, the 45001 does not require registration of WHS advisors. This would really depend, on the organization, and also the legislative requirements, whichever state you're from.
Thank you, Roland. I'll just pass you over back to Stephen.
Okay.
Thanks to everybody participating in today's webinar. Hopefully it's given you a useful insight into what's being proposed in this new standard. The current status, of course, is that we have an opportunity now to, as an organisation, that is the Safety Institute, has an opportunity to provide further input based on member input and member feedback into the development of a second draft international standard. Now, my current understanding is that the time frame for actually publishing the standard is going to be sometime in the first half of next year. But having been involved in other standards committees, these timeframes often tend to get pushed out. So we'll be watching the development very closely, and as an organisation, we invite as many members as possible to think about providing input into the development of the second draft, and that can be done primarily through Roland. Roland is coordinating the Safety Institute's response to this draft standard. So we certainly welcome input from as many people as possible. To date, we've had around 20 plus members that have already provided input into the development of this draft, so we would certainly welcome input from others as well. Again, thank you for your time, and hopefully you found the webinar useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland and Stephen, for your presentation, and thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. Please stay logged in to take our online survey, which you'll be redirected to now. We thank you in advance for your feedback and wish you a pleasant afternoon.